So, Patrick, thanks so much for joining us. Patrick has recently been writing, you've been writing on the Washington State Building Code Council and the banning of uh, natural gas for housing hookups and things like that. Why don't you walk us through the rough timeline for anyone who's kind of been out of the loop and just give the basic story of where we are or where we have been and where we are today?
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Um, so the State Building Code Council is a regulatory agency in Washington State that is in charge of making regulations regarding the construction of commercial and residential buildings. Typically, every 3 years, they update their codes. And so the last code cycle was the 2021 code. And in the energy code, they had efforts to effectively ban natural gas, water, and space heating in new buildings. There was some concerns about that violating federal law called EPCA. That basically it sort of says that the federal government sets standards for energy efficiency, and they have standards for natural gas, water, and space heating, and any local government or state government can't try to circumvent that. They can't try to work around. The federal government has said you can use natural gas, water, and space heating, so that's the way it is. In order to get around that, they worked on some amendments that had the same standards, the same sort of goal, but theoretically allowed for natural gas, water, and space heating so that they weren't violating or preempting federal law. Because if they preempt federal law and they implement the code, then there's a high likelihood that there'll be a legal challenge and that the whole code could get thrown out, or they'd have to go back to the starting board. So I started working with WPC about 6 months ago. That was at the tail end of the cycle for these amendments to the Washington State Energy Code, the 2021 code. And so I quickly was trying to read up, get up to speed on it. It was kind of like sink or swim right into the fire. And my kind of process is, I don't assume that government automatically does something right or that authority automatically does the right thing. And so
I'd say a pretty safe assumption.
it's a safe assumption. And so every time I came across like an RCW when I was going through their proposed rule changes, I would go look at the RCW to see what does the RCW say. And I only made it like 4 or 5 pages into their proposed rule changes when I came across the Small Business Economic Impact Statement. And the RCW it's citing is the Regulatory Fairness Act. It's a state law. And I immediately was going, wait a minute. One and one's not adding up here. There's something going off. So I did a lot more research and realized that the Regulatory Fairness Act requires certain things that they look at for how small businesses are impacted by regulation. What's the cost of compliance for them? And if it's disproportionate to large businesses, then agencies need to take steps to mitigate those costs. And it was pretty clear that the Building Code Council had not done the required analysis, not done the required calculations, and thus it was impossible for them to have taken the appropriate steps to mitigate those costs because they don't know what those costs are. And so we tried going through the process in a good faith effort to try to get them. As soon as I realized this problem, it was thankfully right about the time that they were accepting public comments. So we had our public comment that was about the sort of the policy itself and the disagreement we have about the policy and the analysis. We made separate comment about, hey, here's this issue. You might want to take a look at it because this could jeopardize the code. And they didn't really address the substance. They passed the code anyway. So then we started an appeals process to get them to have to officially answer this. And in January, they basically, once again, didn't address the substance and just said, we did it, so therefore it is fine, and we stand by it, and we deny the appeal. So the next process was you can appeal that decision to the governor, which we did last month. And the governor has received it. They've published in the Washington State Register that they received our appeal. And so they have to respond this month to our appeal about this issue.
Okay, so if you are listening to this and you're wondering if you need to support Washington Policy Center, Patrick read every RCW that was being cited in these proposed rule changes. That alone is enough to give someone a headache by reading one RCW, let alone many. That's a great reason to support WPC, finding these inconsistencies. So well done, Patrick, there.
Thank you.
That's crazy. So, and then when we're talking about the disproportionate impact of costs, did you want to clarify about like cost of compliance versus, implementation costs, things like that?
Yeah, this is a really tricky topic because it very quickly gets super complicated and really into the weeds. And this is a subset of the broader issue, which normally people are talking about. How is this going to affect my housing price? If I want to remodel, if I want to buy a new house, or my kid wants to buy a new house, what's it going to do for them? Spoiler alert, it's going to cost them a lot more money. Um, but so this specifically, it's not dealing with the broader cost of the regulation as a whole. It's just with the cost that businesses have. So like the law specifically cites like this includes costs of equipment, supplies, labor, professional services, and administrative costs that they might have to deal with when it comes to complying with code changes. And then even specifically, I realized this today, we're not talking about the administrative costs that come from, or the business costs that come from the original 2021 code. This is just the amendments to that code. The 2021 code only just went into effect after we started our appeals process. So, and the reason why I pursued this is I thought, well, a lot of these businesses, they're highly qualified, they're good paying jobs. If you have to have your employees even just do 1 day of training to get up to speed on these code changes, that's going to be a pretty sizable number for a business, let alone if you have to hire extra services, if you have to buy new equipment, if you have to do anything else, you can quickly get into the thousands of dollars. And there's certain thresholds that the state has for what's considered a disproportionate cost, but you can very quickly hit those thresholds with just a little bit of cost. And it was clear that the Building Code Council hadn't done all the research on this.
So, in the chat, we've got a question: is the natural gas ban in Wash State an energy efficiency rule? Is that how they're justifying that? Do you know?
That is a great question. You were this Tom. Thank you, Tom Osborne, for asking this because you're getting right to the point. Yes. So there's different efforts to kind of deal with natural gas right now. Like we had a policy on the go that talked about HB 1589. The Building Code Council has basically their edict is to try to reduce the energy consumption in the building sector by controlling energy efficiency. So incrementally, they're trying to increase energy efficiency every code cycle to get to a certain benchmark that they're trying to hit by 2030. So and because of that, they're trying to sort of circumvent and in a roundabout way say, or make it harder to use natural gas because they say it's less efficient than electric heat pumps for water and space heating.
So, one of the things you mentioned that still just baffles my mind is the justification for not responding seems to be that they just say it's good. Like they don't give you like, no, the costs aren't that minimal, or we've done some preemptive cost projections and it doesn't seem to be a concern. It's just kind of like, it passed, and if it passed, then it's law, and if it's law, then it's good. I mean, like, did they give any kind of rationale? What did that response look like?
That's probably been the most frustrating thing for me. I've had to do some meditation because it's not like when you know what you're looking for. And for me, I've pointed it out to them. I've given direct links, here's what you're looking for. It only takes like 15 minutes to read the impact statement, which aren't that long because they didn't do them properly. And the law, which also is not that long. And it's just a little checklist of, okay, the law says you have to have this, and then this. Oh, this isn't there, this isn't there, this isn't there, this isn't there. And so it's almost like gaslighting of them going, well, we did it. So, the quality might not be what you like, but it's there. They've also made other claims, like they claimed, well, we have other cost benefit analysis. So if our impact statement isn't up to snuff, we've got this other analysis that covers it. But that other analysis that they referenced is required by the Administrative Procedure Act. It's not additional cost benefit analysis. That's a whole separate, like, yes, that's necessary in that analysis. It's good that you have it. But that does not meet your requirements under the Regulatory Fairness Act. And I think ultimately it comes down to, based off what the council members have said and what staff has said, is they just don't understand what the law requires of them, which it's a little frustrating because like the law is not that complicated. But and you know, then it's maybe yeah, so that's kind of the gist of it.
I mean, my inclination there is the one, it's disappointing that they would say, oh, they or that they don't understand, right? Because they're in that position where they can make these kinds of rules. But two, it's also to the point where, yeah, maybe we have too many rules on the books if you're getting bombarded with all these different things to check. So maybe we shouldn't be adding to that with kind of energy efficiency rules like this. I don't know. Um, there's another question in the chat here. Have you also looked at the cost of training for local jurisdictions, another unfunded mandate? I don't know if you've had any experience looking into that or not.
Um, that's a good question. I've mainly just been focusing on the business side of it, so I don't know about the cost for like local jurisdictions or local government, how that
Yeah.
is. That's kind of it's a tricky balance when you're talking about policy analysis. It's kind of hard because if you make it too big, like if you require that they look at too many things, it's hard to do really good analysis. But at the same time, when you look more topically at these changes, it's easy to realize that there's other holistic impacts. Like Charles was talking about how the cost of housing can affect your transportation plan. But when you're doing transportation analysis, you don't want them to have to also do economic forecasting on what housing prices will be 10 years from now. So that's where it's kind of you don't want rule makers to have to look at everything, but when you look at the impact of laws or regulation, it's easy to see that you can try to do something in one area, but it can have an effect somewhere else that you probably weren't considering.
Wow. So, I mean, economics is just the study of human action. And so when you're making rules that are going to impact human behavior in one area, naturally that's going to spread to other areas. So you're absolutely right there. It's why us laissez-faire free market types are kind of like, let's maybe not try to account for every single scenario because it's hard to determine how people are going to behave and the wide-ranging effects there.
Yeah, and
Um,
an example of this is that you're trying to control energy consumption, overall consumption, just through efficiency. But so when it comes to mandating electric heat pumps, one of the cool things the electric heat pumps can do is they can be both heating and air conditioning. The problem is most homes or a lot of homes in Washington State don't have air conditioning right now. So that means that they use less energy during the summer. But all of a sudden, if you're putting air conditioning, mandating air conditioning into every home in Washington State, the logical conclusion you would arrive to is, well, that's probably going to increase energy consumption, but that's not something that the Building Code Council considered or looked at. They weren't required to look at that. So it's very likely that while you're trying to increase efficiency, an unintended consequence is you might be increasing consumption by giving everybody air condition air conditioning.
That that is really a really good point. I mean, it's one of those things where a lot of the barrier to entry for air conditioning is the cost. I know a lot of people say, "Oh, I don't have it," but if I had it, I would use it. And now, if you're going to create this mandating of a system that's going to incentivize it, well, of course, people are going to use it. That you've removed the biggest barrier
Yeah.
to them using it. Which, again, I don't think people should or shouldn't. But to your point, it's going to go completely contrary to the energy efficiency usage goals that they're setting in place
Well,
with this
and it's a
regulation.
mandate. I mean, if you build a house that if you build it in such a way where you don't really need air conditioning, and if you're in a location that doesn't get that hot, you might be able to say, well, I'm going to save out. I don't need that. I just need a little heating if you build it like really efficiently. But this is saying, nope, you've got to have heat pumps. Well, the amendments, it's kind of a debate because they're going, well, theoretically you can use natural gas, but everybody in the industry has said realistically they can't figure out how to get through the compliance tables to add in extra stuff to get to the number required in order to allow for natural gas water space heating. So it's kind of a case of, well, we'll have to see what the outcome is.
Yeah. There are a couple more questions on the training stuff. I don't know if you have any specific knowledge on that since you have been, focusing a little bit here, but some really good points being brought up about the State Building Code Council
Oh,
not offering
Jeffrey
training
Jeffrey
and
has an excellent question here I want to answer. Okay,
yeah,
so
yeah, please
Jeffrey
get to it.
asks, the International Building Code offers training. Why should the SBCC mandate and have zero opportunity to educate? This is a fantastic point that I discovered going through this is so you have this international body. It's more of a national body, but international body that sets standards. And that's kind of what we use as the basis for our codes. And they try to do a really good job. You have highly qualified people making, trying to really do their best to come up with like really good code. And if you just completely take that and don't make a lot of changes to it, the Department of Energy will actually provide resources to states to do analysis. And the Department of Energy's analysis is better than our state's analysis, and they have better resources. So if you just take what the international code does, you can get the federal government to help you with the analysis. You'll have better analysis for a lower cost for your government. But our state code, our energy code goes back, I think, before the international code was doing an energy code. And so ours is kind of different from the international code. So we don't qualify for those federal resources, which made sense before the international code offered a robust energy code. But now that they do, and it's pretty good, we could just be using the international code and then get the Department of Energy to help have robust, high quality, much better analysis, and it would be saving us money and time.
But that sounds way too efficient. That sounds like
Makes too much sense. And then Tom Osborne asks, this will be over 20K for homeowner. It's potentially the overall cost for consumers could be in the over 10,000. It kind of depends. It varies, but even if you increase the cost of a house only by $1,000, that still prices out a lot of people from buying a home, because you then have how that gets affected with like mortgage rates, which are higher than they have been for like the past 20 years right now. So even the smallest amount of costs, let alone tens of thousands of dollars, is going to price a lot of people out from owning a home.
Well, and just in the same way that you are highlighting the fact that the rule has to do with disproportionately impacting small businesses, and that's what sort of started this whole thing. Of course, these sort of costs that to someone who's making a lot of money every year may not seem substantial. It disproportionately impacts lower income people in a situation where we're already worried about housing affordability and allowing people to buy houses who are first-time home buyers. So it really is punishing the people who are the most vulnerable at this point.
Yeah, and that makes a great point. Let me see if I can pull it up here. So, because there's different, I talked about thresholds earlier. There's certain thresholds for what's considered more than a minor cost, and they go by industry. So for residential remodelers, the threshold is about $1,500. If they go over $1,500 in this cost for compliance, then that's more than a minor cost. But these code changes are really complex. And so if a remodeler, I think that's one potential area or industry where it's a lot of remodelers are small businesses, and these changes are super complex. I could easily see their cost of compliance being more than $1,500. So that's a case where if they had done the proper analysis, and if I'm correct, they would have seen that, and then they could have said, okay, how do we make this easier for remodelers to deal with? Because yeah, the most expensive part, I think, is probably going to be somebody whose house was built 30 years ago, 20 years ago under an entirely different code, and all of a sudden having to like add for future electrification, add in outlets, add in, an EV charger in the garage, and then change out their space and water heating. That's going to be a pretty penny that they're going to have to pay.
All right, last question I'm going to get to here before we close, because we just got a little bit. So we're waiting on the governor, essentially, or the governor's office to respond. What is the potential outcome there? If he lets it go, is there a challenge down the road that we would, that people could pursue, or does he have the power to just override that rule or send it back? Do you know what that next step looks like in either outcome?
Yeah, he can. There's kind of a back and forth. Ultimately, if like the agency doesn't do what he thinks they should do, he could do an emergency suspension of the rule. I don't think that's a likely outcome. And I understand there's a lot of pressure to not have any further delays in the implementation of the code or have to go back to the starting. But to me, the principle here is kind of the rule of the law. Should agencies have to follow the law? And if they don't, should we hold them accountable? To me, the obvious answer is yes. So I proposed an alternative solution to the governor wherein they say, okay, don't delay the code, don't make them go back and start over, but make them perform a new small business economic impact statement for these amendments and the original code. And if there's just proportionate costs, then they can enter emergency rulemaking to mitigate those. So that way, we're not delaying the code, we're not messing things up there, but we're still holding the Building Code Council accountable and making sure that small businesses are not going to be disproportionately impacted by that. I'm not sure if the governor will agree. I think that's a very reasonable proposal. But to me, what I'm more of looking is I want to see, I think the governor's office will have to contend with the substance of the complaint, and they'll have to kind of say whether or not the impact statements meet the law. And I think because they typically have a general counsel, so a lawyer's going to be writing the reply. A lawyer's going to know they can't lie, and they don't have a lot of room to talk circles around it. So they're going to have to really address, hey, here's the essential components they're required to have. Are they in there? And the obvious answer is no, they're not. If the governor doesn't do anything, we could petition the Joint Administrative Rules Review Committee in the legislature that has authority to look at these. And they have more experience looking at this. I'm not sure what that process is, but it's just kind of a case where you have to in good faith effort do what you can and hope for the best outcome.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Patrick. Really appreciate you being on and super insightful and clear explanation of this. Thanks for holding their feet to the fire.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, that's it for this episode of Washington Policy on the Go. Thank you guys for being here. Always appreciate it. I believe in 2 weeks, we might have, rather than a Tuesday, I think we might have a Monday issue of WPC on the Go. It should be a special edition for Earth Day. So keep your eyes out for that. It may be a little bit shifted. We should be sending an email to let you know what way that does go. And if you want to send this as a reminder, we do upload these on YouTube. They are available on Washington Policy Center's YouTube channel. Share it with friends. Sign up for our newsletter. We distribute all this kind of updates. When we get notice from the governor, that will be in our Friday email, letting you know what the decision there is. So be sure to sign up for that on our website again, washingtonpolicy.org. Thanks again, and have a great day.